Hi everyone, this is Lauren from Special Olympics Maine, and I'm here today to chat with you guys and hopefully give you a quick overview of our return to play guidelines and protocols. We know there is a lot of information that we are sending out to you guys, so please feel free to watch this video, tune in, and definitely look at the packet and the document that we have sent to you in addition to listening to this video as well. Hopefully this gives you a good representation. And again, we are always here for questions and concerns and feedback. So we're looking forward to hearing from you guys as we approach our phase one return to play. So we will jump right into it with our guiding principles. So you'll see 5 guiding principles on your screen in front of you. I will briefly go through each one of these and then jump into more of the specific phase 1 guidelines. So in front of you, you will see that number 1, the health and safety of all of our members of the Special Olympics Maine movement is important and paramount. So we know that our safety, your safety as being a coach, an athlete, a participant, and volunteer is very, very important to us. At number 2, beyond a sports organization, Special Olympics is a movement for and by the people with intellectual disabilities, and its guidance must be inclusive and directed at the unique needs and abilities of people with intellectual disabilities. Relevant U.S. CDC guidelines should serve as the minimum standards today and within the document you have in front of you. In addition, consideration should be given to local and community authorities in that if there are more conservative or restrictive guidelines, these should be followed. So we want to make sure that the most restrictive guidelines within your area are followed. Guidance is based on current medical information available at the time of us sending this out to you. So the most updated info is reflected in this document, in this return to play guidelines. And lastly, at number 5, guidance takes a phased approach that is dependent on local transmission rates, as well as the testing, the monitoring, the contact tracing, and the health system capacity. So all of those factors are played into our descriptions and the creation of our return to play document. We will jump right into kind of our phased approach that Special Olympics Maine has created. Again, this is stemmed from our Special Olympics Inc., SOI, SONA, and the Maine CDC guidelines as well. So right off the bat, you will see that SOM, Special Olympics Maine, has adopted a 4-phased approach to return to activities. It is important to note that there may be times the community will revert to an earlier phase, and if and when the spread of infection rises in the future. So although we are starting our phase 1 August 1st through the end of September, an 8-week period, we will be in that phase 1. We will then evaluate in the last 2 weeks and see, where we are at here in Maine. If we have to go back to phase 0 with no pretty much staying at home, no events, all virtual events at that point, or moving to phase 2, where you will see that there is an increase to 50 people at gatherings. So again, that in that phase 1, everything will be reevaluated so we have a better sense of where to move forward in our state and within the areas and counties as well. So we will walk through this, and I will then walk you through 2 things to keep in mind as we go through this phase 1. So right off the bat, you will see in our phase 1, again, there is clusters of cases occurring, as you will see currently here in Maine. The stay-at-home order is lifted. The restriction on size of gatherings is 10 or less people. 10 or less people. And as we go into our phase 1, it's really important to note that we are not offering at this time state level competitions or area level competitions. Our phase 1 is only for those programs and teams to be able to get together, 10 people or less, to be able to train or practice for Special Olympics Maine activities in sports. So again, we are not jumping into events at this time. This is to be able to lift the stay-at-home order and for programs and teams to be able to get together and train or practice specifically for Special Olympics Maine sports. You'll see here under our phase 1, high risk individuals. We will be referencing our appendix, I will show you guys at the end of this presentation. High risk individuals should continue to remain at home. We will jump into high risk individuals and the importance of education and educating our athletes on what that looks like to be a high risk individual and the importance to remain at home. To go off of this, the practices, the health and fitness leadership in local events, again, less than 10 participants or athletes. And that does include volunteers and coaches as well. So that is within the 10 people at that practice or training. That can and may resume if they adhere to strict physical distancing and sanitation protocols. We will break down in the next few slides. I do want to remind you that no direct or indirect contact, for example, through a ball, if you're touching the same bocce ball, for example, that should not take place. So at this time, all personal equipment is allowed. The sharing of equipment is not allowed. Again, no direct and no indirect contact. Virtual programming, us here at Special Olympics Maine will continue virtual programming for those that cannot attend and should not attend in-person events at this time. So those will be made available for those, again, that cannot attend in person. And lastly, school-based activities led by schools, once schools open, crossing our fingers, should comply with guidance from schools and districts. Again, we will know more about this as time goes on, but again, school-based activities led by schools should comply with the guidance from schools and or districts. Again, we are focusing today, this presentation, on our phase 1. That is the orange that you see right in front of you, those guidelines. Two things to keep in mind that I wanted to reference right now is participation risk awareness form that we will jump into a little bit later, and also the clearance form from healthcare professional. So to talk a little bit about that, the participation risk awareness form and the acknowledgement prior to returning to any in-person Special Olympics activities in phases 1 through 2. Again, we're focusing on phase 1 right now. All participants are recommended and suggested to complete and return a participant risk awareness form, from which the information on that form provides guidance on assessing risk and acknowledges that participation could increase risk of contracting or spreading COVID-19. So we are suggesting and recommending that form is signed, is completed, and is returned back to Special Olympics Maine. And I will show you what that form looks like at the end of this presentation. Another thing to keep in mind is the clearance from healthcare professional. So if participants have tested positive or have been diagnosed with COVID-19, the participant must provide written proof of clearance from their healthcare professional prior to returning to the sport or fitness activities. So the local program will ensure that all participants, the athletes, unified partners, coaches, volunteers, staff, or family that is going to a training or a practice session are educated about those that are at higher risk of complications from COVID-19, as well as other procedures and expectations for return to activities. So those are two important things to keep in mind. The participation risk awareness form that we will show you at the end of this presentation, and then also getting the clearance from healthcare professional if you have been diagnosed with COVID-19 before you have participated with us in gearing up for a training or for a practice. So from here, we will actually jump into the breakdown of our phase 1, debriefing our phase 1. You will see that within our phases, there are 4 elements. There's a comply, which is at the top, educate, prepare, and activity. On this screen right now, you see 3 of 4 of those elements: the comply, educate, and prepare. So within comply, within our phase 1, again, at the beginning of the screen, you'll see that gatherings, trainings, and practices are restricted to 10 people or less. Individuals at high risk should remain safe at home. And with under comply, we want to make sure that all local and national regulations are being followed. These are obviously going to be able to reference as you we move on into the document, but they also will be followed afterwards. So following all local and national regulations. We'll then jump into educate, the next element. So we want to make sure that a COVID-19 point person is being acknowledged and communicated with us being Special Olympics Maine, the state office. We want to make sure coaches educate athletes and program participants on high-risk conditions and the risk of participation. Anyone that is experiencing symptoms must stay at home and must contact their healthcare provider to get clearance before they can participate with Special Olympics Maine and a training or a practice at this time. You will see in the appendix as well that there are many educational videos to be able to help lead, run a practice or a training, again, within 10 people or less. So some of these videos do contain a summary of the return to play protocols prepared by SOI, preparing a venue, so going to a specific, maybe it's a field, maybe it's a tennis court, how to prepare the venue for safety. Also, a few videos will cover prevention and safety, on-site screening, how to do that, coaching adjustments, and training in a safe environment. So all of those educational videos and modules I will show you at the end of this video, where you can find those and watch them to prepare for that first practice or training. We will then jump into prepare, that third element on your screen there. Again, I'm not reading through every single bullet point, so it is very important that you go back into this document, make sure that you read through it, and make sure you definitely ask us if you have questions. But to give you an overview of the prepare section of phase one, we have to make sure that having a COVID screening in place for you when you are going to a training or practice is very important. Making the screening questions and protocol available for programs, family members, and caregivers. So we do have a screening template that I will share with you again after a few more of these slides, where you have a better idea of what a on-site screening may look like. Questions can absolutely be shared with families, caregivers before they attend a training or practice, to give you a better idea if that athlete and participant is ready to attend that training or practice. So with that, again, we are asking for screening to take place before the athlete participates in SOM training or practice. The minimizing of shared equipment I talked briefly about before. We want to make sure that there is no sharing of equipment. When possible, if you can use an outdoor training facility, whether that is an outdoor field or at least an area to maximize that social distancing, that physical distancing. Having athletes, very important here, having athletes bring their own PPE, for example, masks. Masks should be worn when social distancing or physical distancing is not able to be adhered to. So I give the example, if you are showing up to a practice, or training, and you are gathering within that area before, everyone within that group or pod should be wearing a mask. Those face coverings should not be worn, although during high intensity activity. So before a practice or training, after a practice or training, if you are still within that area surrounded by others, a mask should be worn. During actual physical activity, the mask can be taken off. We want to make sure everyone can breathe, everyone can be staying healthy, but also socially and physically distant. So again, if you have any questions with that, please let us know. We also recommend coming up with a pre-practice or training speech to remind athletes and participants about using PPE. So before maybe a training session takes place, you're communicating with those athletes and participants about several things: using PPE, using a mask, wearing a mask before, and after a training or practice, talking a lot about hygiene, frequent hand washing while you are together and especially when you're not together. Avoid touching the face. Cover your mouth when coughing or sneezing. Basic, as we might seem, basic hygiene factors, but definitely we want to make sure that you are having that conversation with your group. The personal equipment use during the training or practice is very important. Again, no sharing of equipment, and the importance of keeping yourself socially distanced from others. We know that it's very hard for a few of our athletes to not give hugs or to not give high fives. This will be definitely a change for many teams and many programs, but we want to stress the factor that definitely taking a break from that, maybe giving an air high five or a thumbs up to show the encouragement, but nothing within direct contact. And lastly, too, I know this is a lot of information thrown out, you guys, but we want to make sure if you are transporting teams or athletes to a practice or to a training, please make sure those participants that are traveling together are wearing face masks during that travel period. I know that we might have several questions about this as time goes on, but again, if you are a day program or an agency in traveling together, we want to make sure those athletes are wearing masks as well. We will now jump into our last element of phase one, which is activity. We have a few more slides for you guys, and then I will be showing you some of the appendix and supplemental documents that you can reference after. So our last element here is activity. All participants with symptoms, maybe even a history of COVID exposure or temperature over 100.4 must not participate in the training or practice. All right, so those three: participants with the symptoms, history of COVID exposure, or temperature over 100.4 must not participate in a training or practice. Please keep in mind that especially during summer months, it is very hot out. So we recommend when a temperature is taken that you do so in a cooler environment to avoid false results. For those athletes that are at high risk, some will continue to, Special Olympics Maine will continue to offer safe and at-home and virtual fitness opportunities for those to be able to participate in activities. So no activities or sports, again, should involve direct or indirect contact. This can mean, again, passing or touching of a ball in the hand. For an example, I used the example before of a bocce ball. We want to make sure that the sharing of equipment is minimal. Again, maintaining the physical distancing and avoiding all close contact. Again, I referenced earlier the high fives, the hugs, the huddles. We want to make sure that is not happening. The wearing a mask throughout the activity. We want to make sure that, again, if you are arriving, that you are wearing a mask. When you are leaving, you are wearing a mask. There should be no spectators on the sidelines of the practice or training. We are asking for caregivers or family members or those that are transporting athletes to and from practices or training sessions to remain physically distant at the site or remain in his or her car or vehicle until the practice is done. Again, a lot of things to be able to remember here, a lot of things to read. Feel free to, again, watch this video as many times as you need and to contact us for questions. So we just ran through, again, our phase one debrief, a quick overview of our 4 elements in which our programs, our coaches need to be able to adhere to. So quickly, we're going to talk briefly about schools. We have, of course, haven't heard yet of the take that schools will be approaching come August and September. But with regards to activities in schools, local programs should follow the school's protocols and guidance in terms of when and how activities may resume. If school activities transition into Special Olympics Maine community activities, for example, the final competition of a tournament is hosted by Special Olympics Maine, then proper return to play protocol and necessary precautions for Special Olympics Maine events, as outlined in this document, must be followed. So again, if the school or community partners guidelines are less stringent or in conflict with the guidelines of Special Olympics Maine, the following guidelines apply. All right, so you'll see that there's 5 points here on your screen. Quickly, I'll read through them. The school or partner leaders or authorities should be informed of the Special Olympics Maine guidelines for determining their return to play. The possibility of high-risk conditions and populations within the movement is conveyed to leaders and authorities. Decision-making and options are provided to students with and without intellectual disabilities to provide for equal treatment. Parents, guardians, and other caregivers of youth participants are provided with education on Special Olympics guidelines and relevant acknowledgments. Again, those are videos that I referenced earlier, and those videos that you will see in the appendix. And lastly, youth participants involved in Special Olympics, branded or sanctioned activities are given the option to opt out without penalty and are provided options for safe at-home activities. So again, these are guidelines that the school should be taking a look at, but at the bare minimum for your local programs, you should follow the school's protocols and guidance in terms of when and how activities may resume. Really quick, we are going to jump into our on-site screening. I referenced this earlier. This is on-site screening that programs and coaches that are leading those trainings and practices of less than 10 people should adhere to. So really quick, we're going to go through, again, this is at page 2 and 3 of that attachment that I will show you in a brief moment. But to give you guys a little bit more info, regular education must be provided to all athletes and staff, volunteers, coaches, and families, and certainly caregivers, reminding them stay home if they have a fever or any signs and symptoms. So this could be, again, a cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, sore throat, congestion, nausea, vomiting, any of those. Again, any symptoms of that, athletes and participants should be staying at home. Individuals must not participate in any activities if they are sick for their own health and to reduce the transmission of any infections to others. We also want to make sure that the following points are covered. So during this time, a few questions, 4 questions actually, will be asked to athletes. So question 1 will be must set up space for the screening for this to take place. So we want to make sure that this screening also can be happening in a physical distance area, but also a private area. Some of these questions, some athletes might not be comfortable with answering in front of others. So please take that into consideration. The 4 questions that should be asked before an individual has partaken in a Special Olympics Maine training or practice are, number 1, in the last 14 days, have you had contact with someone who has been sick with COVID-19? Number 2, have you had a fever in the last week, temperature of 100.4 or higher? Number 3, do you have a cough and/or difficulty breathing? And number 4, do you have any other signs or symptoms of COVID-19? Again, I listed a few before. Those are, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headaches, loss of taste or smell, many other symptoms as well that we've listed. So those 4 questions must be, again, asked to those athletes before that training and practice. We do have obviously other on-site screening protocols that I will show you as we reach that appendix section. So our next slide actually will show you at the bottom of the document itself. You will see that additional materials are available in the document. So really quickly, I'm actually going to get out of here and show you that return to play document. So we see here that I am on the screen of the last page, page 7. The first part, obviously on your screen, you can see that if you have any questions, please do contact our Special Olympics Maine State office. We also have our email right there if you do have questions. Underneath that, you will see that there are many supplemental documents. The first one is a COVID-19 point of contact form. And what that is that it's a form for coaches that are leading a practice or a training session should complete. This might be the head of delegation, or on another day, it could be a head coach. So we want to make sure whoever is leading that practice or training session is completing that form. You'll see that I just went in and typed in my email and my name. This is using a DocuSign template and can simply put in the local program, your name as the coach that's running that training or practice. Again, this gives us a good idea who is participating within this phase 1 rollout. So specifically, we want to know the sports and activities that you are leading that 10 or less participants are at. When do you plan to offer these opportunities, and where do you plan to offer these opportunities? The last part, the agreement, again, is checking off that all that you have adhered to reading through our return to play guidelines, that you are adhering to our return to play guidelines, and that you are definitely okay with being able to put something on. You'll see at the bottom that you have the space to sign. We want to make sure, again, that you are absolutely filling this out before a training or a practice takes place. I will go back and then you will see that there are other supporting documents right down at the appendix. The second one that I want to be able to show you guys is the risk assessment form. Again, this is the form I referenced at the beginning that is highly suggested and recommended that each participant that is going through a training or a practice is completing this. And that is not only an athlete, but if you had a volunteer as a coach to be able to help you out with that training or practice, they must also complete this. So that is with anyone that is going to this training or practice. So again, you'll see that is in a checkbox format. And at the bottom in that second page, we need to know a little bit more of the participant full name, signatures as well. And at the bottom, you will see that this form is not through DocuSign, but actually will be electronically submitted. So you can print this out, fill it out, or you can also fill this out on your screen. You can see that I'm typing in my name right here. I would then, after I completely fill this out, save it onto my desktop and send it to info@somaine.org, that highlighted address below. Again, these all should be completely filled out. Once they are, before that training and practice happens, then you are to send that off to that email address below, info@somaine.org. We will take a step back, go back to our appendix. Again, that's located on the last page, page 7. And the last one I wanted to quickly show you guys today is the screening and tracking report form template. So you will see that in this, if I scroll down to that second page, is what you saw in the PowerPoint before. If you scroll up to that first page, you absolutely can print these pages as well. In this first page, you can actually print and send home to the caregivers of that athlete, the family of that athlete, to be able to go through a screening protocol at home as well. I know some programs might decide to do that. We again want to make sure that this screening protocol happens at the practice or training before as well. We we know that a lot can change between at home and then before a practice. So a few reminders here, again, bolded and in red, all participants to be reminded that they must stay at home if they are sick or showing signs and symptoms of COVID-19. After that, you will see that screening protocols, those 4 questions, I'll highlight them quickly, that I read through earlier are the ones that need to be answered before an athlete participates. After that, you'll see the thermometer and the temperature section, and we want to make sure this is adhered to as well. And then at the end of that, you are really recording that participant first and last name. Again, we put participant because we know that it's not only an athlete, but a unified partner that's being involved in the training or practice, a coach, a volunteer, or a staff member. We want to make sure that everyone that is at that training or practice is also following these return to play and on-site screening protocols. So you'll see that contact information, whether or not they signed the code of conduct. Again, that is linked that I showed you earlier. Were they screened? And then the sign or symptoms of COVID-19, a yes or no. So this is a tracking form for you to fill out. Again, we do not need this to be turned into us at Special Olympics Maine. The 2 forms that we need to be turned into us, again, to be able to participate in our training and practice led by head coaches and programs is that COVID point of contact form, that first one, and the code of conduct form that that athletes and others that are participating in the training practices should complete and, again, email back to us. Off of this appendix, you will see that there's also a virtual games participation waiver for non-registered athletes. Again, if you are an athlete and you are jumping on board with us and you aren't yet registered through Special Olympics Maine, but you might be participating in our virtual opportunities and activities, such as our weekly Zoom fun kind of meetings and calls, or our weekly warrior workouts, anything like that we offer virtually, must complete a participation waiver. Again, that's for non-registered athletes. You also see that who is at high risk of COVID-19. This is an educational resource. I'll click on it quickly to be able to share with you. Again, this is something that you can use as a reference to educate your athletes and program on what is and who is at high risk for COVID-19. Again, we are highly recommending that no individuals that are at high risk are participating in this phase 1 and in those trainings or practices. So please take a greater look at that. And the other thing I want to reference is our frequently asked questions and our training and educational materials below. So you see that there, and I'll quickly highlight them, are many videos and PDFs to be able to educate you on how to run a safe and healthy practice and training session. Preparing the venue, you'll see examples of coaching adjustments, marking the field, using, definitely a lot more visuals to be able to create that physical distancing. So please do reference these videos and PDFs as educational resources to planning practices and trainings. Lastly, I'm just going to click quickly on frequently asked questions. This document, again, will lay out a few questions that others may have and that you may have. So please read through this as well. You'll see that many things are covered here, from fundraising to the risk assessment form, to the screening, into even specifically masks or PPE guidance. So please, I know that it's a longer document, but it should be very helpful to you for when and if you have questions. So I will go back to our appendix at this time in our actual document of return to play protocols. And again, 7-page document here. We really worked through and talked about our phase 1 today. And as we continue to scroll down, you will see on that last page our specific appendix materials. I will get out of this at this point. kind of show our return to play screen. We are definitely looking forward to hopefully getting a few more of our participants and athletes out there training and staying healthy specifically. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Special Olympics Maine, our state office. You can definitely give us a ring on the phone or through email. We'll be happy to answer any questions. I hope this video was a little bit more helpful for you guys. We look forward to hearing from you, and please stay safe and healthy. Thank you, guys.